We'll be doing satin stitch here on our little poppy friends. The cool thing about satin stitch is it gets its name because it's supposed to look like a piece of satin is lying on your fabric. Don't feel like that is something you have to shoot for. Satin stitch is definitely one of those that you get better the more you practice. Don't feel as if your satin stitch is subpar or not good enough. There is no right or wrong way to do a satin stitch, folks. This is just the way that I do it and the way that works for me. I get asked all the time, are there any ways to make it so it is easier to use the satin stitch? The less time you use stitching with a single piece of thread, the better chance your satin stitch will look smoother and lay better. So definitely keep your thread length shorter, use less strands if you have to, and also practice makes perfect, folks. Just practice. The more you practice, the better you'll get. I don't use satin floss a lot, but we are using it for this. So if you're wanting your satin stitch to get better, I would practice with the standard 6-strand embroidery floss. That's a great way to not get too frustrated and to learn the technique better. We are using satin floss today because it's the satin stitch, so I thought it would be kind of appropriate. Give it a nice little extra shine on the finished hoop when you're done. With the satin floss, this is the only type of floss where I recommend knotting before you stitching. Because it unravels so easily, it can be really difficult to get a good clean knot at the end when you're done. So definitely knotting it before it begins to unravel will definitely help you out a ton. I will show you the knot that I like to use. What I like to do is I take the thread, I wrap it around my finger one time, I then begin to roll my thread a little bit, and then just kind of pull. It gives you a pretty simple, kind of messy knot. Then what I'll do is I'll pull it really tight, and then I'll come over here and kind of clip off some of this little extra stuff that's sticking up. But you can see how easily this frays. So you got to be real careful with satin floss, folks. Because we're using 6 strands today, it might be a little bit more difficult to thread the thread into the chenille 22. So I prefer using the chenille 18. It makes it a little less difficult. However, satin stitching with the chenille 18 can be difficult in this small area that we're doing. So if you're having problems threading your needle, but you're not liking how stitching with the chenille 18 works, just use less strands. So just split your strands to 3, and that should make it easier for you. I'm going to use 6. Satin stitch is basically just a bunch of straight stitches lying right next to each other. When I think of satin stitch, I think of it as my coloring book stitch, as in you would get a coloring book and you would just kind of fill it in with markers, right? Same thing with satin stitch. So with markers, for instance, we would start here and we would begin to slowly fill in this area. With satin stitch, we're doing the same thing. We're slowly filling in an area. Now, when it comes to floral embroidery, the way I like to do my satin stitch is instead of doing it horizontally across a petal, I like to do it vertically. I like to make it look like it is growing, like it's an actual organic flower growing. Start at the center point of any petal and begin just to slowly fill it in like so. What we're going to do is kind of like how we do a straight stitch. You're going to come up, making sure not to stitch around our whipped back stitch, okay? We want to be able to see the whipped back stitch outline. So come up underneath that. Then we're going to take, as you can see, it's already starting to unravel, folks. It's already starting to unravel, so it may be more difficult to lay flat. Take your needle and poke it in toward the center of the flower. Then you come up right next to it, okay? You don't want to leave any spaces. Come up right next to it, making sure none of this fraying. There you go. Sure, also when you're doing satin stitch, to have tight fabric. You want to make sure none of this gets bubbly or bunched up when you're stitching. And there you have it. That's our first little petal over here, all filled in. Now we're going to move on to this one over here so y'all can see a completed poppy and how it's supposed to look. Now, if you're stitching and you have a gap in between your satin stitches, just come back up like this and just cover it up. Ta-da! And we have done it. We have filled in an entire flower. And that's why I really like this floss. Even though it's hard to work with, it does give it a little bit of extra shine to your satin stitch. But yeah, that's it. That's the satin stitch, folks. Tomorrow we're going to be learning French knot and pistol stitch. We're going to be creating our little guys here on the inside of these flowers. So make sure that you have at least one flower filled in with satin stitch. As you can see, I haven't even caught up over here on my whipped back stitch. So make sure you have at least one flower filled in so that way we can do the French knot and pistol stitch for that. Don't feel like you have to complete the entire, all the flowers just yet. You will have the entire weekend to catch up as well. With that in mind, you still have time to go over DMC and get yourself some materials. Make sure that you use the code GULAXDMC at checkout for 15% off of your purchase. And also, if there's some supplies there that are missing or you can't get access to them or you can't get anything delivered in time, you are more than welcome to go to your local craft store and get whatever you can find. A lot of DMC's products are available at Michael's, Joann's, local craft stores. Just go there, check it out, and get whatever you can. Don't want you guys missing out on this month because it's been a lot of fun so far. I can't wait for all of us to fill in our own piece, our own unique way, and then share it with the world. Thank you guys for tuning in. Can't wait to get stitchy with you tomorrow. Yay, our first week is almost done.